What if the destiny of a whole nation depended on one woman's tearful prayer? What if the future of God's people rested not on a king or a soldier, but on a quiet sob in a lonely temple? This is a story about just that. It's a story about a woman named Hannah, a woman whose heart was breaking into a million tiny pieces. She felt empty and forgotten. Her tears fell like rain onto the dusty stone floor. She was all alone, she thought, but she wasn't. Someone was listening. Someone who hears every whisper, catches every tear, and knows every secret sadness hidden deep inside our hearts. The temple in Shiloh was usually a busy, noisy place. People came from all over Israel to worship God. They brought their sacrifices, sang their songs, and celebrated with their families. But now, it was quiet. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft colors of orange and purple. The priests had finished their work for the day. The crowds had gone home. Only the gentle flicker of the lampstand inside the holy place lit the growing shadows. It was in this hush, this holy quiet, that Hannah knelt to pray. She had come with a heart so full of pain that she couldn't even speak the words out loud. She felt invisible. Year after year, she had come to this very place. Year after year, she had watched other women with their children, laughing and playing. Their joy was like a sharp knife in her own heart. She longed for a child more than anything in the world, a little hand to hold, a little voice to call her mother. But her arms remained empty. Her home remained quiet. The world seemed full of happy families, but Hannah's world was a silent, aching space. So she came to God, the only one she knew who could fill that emptiness. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. She didn't have a grand speech. She didn't have a fancy prayer. All she had were her tears and the deep, desperate cry of her soul. She poured out all her sadness, all her longing, all her hurt right there at God's feet. It was a messy, tear-stained prayer. The kind of prayer that doesn't use pretty words but comes straight from the deepest part of you. And in that quiet temple, as darkness fell outside, a single, heartbroken prayer was about to change everything. Not just for Hannah, but for all of Israel. Back home in the rolling hills of Ramathaim lived Hannah's family. It was a beautiful place, with olive groves and fields of grain that swayed in the gentle breeze. Her husband was a good man named Elkanah. He loved Hannah very much. He saw her sadness, and it made his own heart ache. He would try to comfort her, telling her, "Hannah, why are you crying? Am I not more to you than 10 sons?" He wanted to make her happy, but he didn't understand the deep, empty space in her heart that only a child could fill. Elkanah loved God and led his family to worship in Shiloh every single year. But Elkanah had another wife. Her name was Peninnah, and Peninnah had children, lots of them. She had sons and daughters who would run and shout and fill her life with noise and laughter. While Hannah's world was quiet, Peninnah's was loud and full, and Peninnah was not a kind woman. She saw Hannah's sadness not with pity, but with pride. She saw Hannah's empty arms and used it as a weapon. She knew just how to make Hannah feel small and worthless. Her words were sharp and cruel, meant to poke at Hannah's deepest wound. Every day was a trial for Hannah. Peninnah would taunt her, making her feel like she was less of a woman, less loved by God. "Where are your children, Hannah?" she might sneer. "God has blessed me, but he has forgotten you." These words were like little stones, thrown at Hannah's heart day after day, until she was covered in bruises you couldn't see. The worst time was the yearly trip to Shiloh. It was supposed to be a happy time of worship, a festival. But for Hannah, it was torture. It was a public reminder of everything she didn't have. In Shiloh, Elkanah would give portions of the sacrifice to his family. He would give a portion to Peninnah and each of her children. But to Hannah, he would give a double portion because he loved her so much. He wanted to show her she was special to him. But this act of love only made Peninnah angrier and more jealous. She would provoke Hannah even more, making her cry until she couldn't even eat the food her husband gave her. And so, Hannah's heart was caught in a cycle of hope and despair, trapped in a home that should have been a refuge, but often felt like a battleground. So it was, during one of these painful trips to Shiloh, that Hannah reached her breaking point. After the family meal, a meal she couldn't bring herself to eat, she slipped away. The sounds of her family faded behind her as she walked toward the temple, the house of the Lord. Her feet felt heavy, each step carrying the weight of years of disappointment and shame. The air was cool on her tear-streaked cheeks. She needed to be alone with God. She felt that if something didn't change, her heart would simply shatter. She couldn't bear another day, another year, of this same unending sorrow. She entered the courtyard of the temple. There, sitting on a chair near the doorpost, was the high priest, Eli. He was an old man now. His eyes were getting dim, and he spent much of his time simply watching the people who came and went. He saw Hannah walk in, her face a mask of grief. He watched her as she found a quiet corner and knelt down. He was the guardian of this holy place, the man who was supposed to help people connect with God. But from his chair, he couldn't hear her prayer. He couldn't see the true state of her heart. Hannah began to pray. But this was no ordinary prayer. It was a battle. She wrestled with her pain, with her feelings of being forgotten by God. She poured out everything, every cruel word from Peninnah, every lonely night, every hopeful morning that ended in disappointment. She gave it all to God. Her lips moved, forming the words silently. Her heart was shouting, screaming to God, but not a sound came out. It was a deep, inward groaning, a communication between her spirit and the Spirit of God, a language that no one else could understand. From his seat, Eli the priest watched this strange sight. He saw a woman swaying back and forth, her mouth moving, but he heard nothing. In those days, it was not common for people to pray so passionately and silently. He saw her flushed face and her deep emotion, and he jumped to the wrong conclusion. He thought she must be drunk. How shameful, he thought, for a woman to come into the house of God in such a state. He didn't see a broken heart. He saw a disgrace, and he decided he needed to put a stop to it. Eli stood up, his priestly robes swishing around his old legs. He walked over to where Hannah was kneeling, her whole body trembling with the force of her prayer. He didn't ask her what was wrong. He didn't offer a kind word. Instead, he spoke harshly, his voice filled with judgment. "How long will you keep on getting drunk?" he demanded. "Get rid of your wine." Imagine Hannah's shock. Here she was, pouring out her soul to God in her deepest moment of pain, and the man of God accuses her of being drunk. It was like having salt poured into her already gaping wound. But Hannah did not get angry. She did not shout back. With great dignity, even through her tears, she looked up at the old priest and spoke, her voice trembling but clear. "Not so, my lord," she answered softly. "I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord." She was not making a scene. She was baring her soul. She was explaining the deepest secrets of her heart to this stranger who had misjudged her so terribly. It took great courage to be so vulnerable. She continued, her voice gaining a little strength. "Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief." She was asking him to look past what he thought he saw, and to see what was really there, a woman desperate for God's help. She was asking for compassion, not judgment. She was asking the priest, to be a bridge to God, not a barrier. Her honest and humble words began to soften Eli's heart. He started to realize he had made a terrible mistake. Eli looked at her again, but this time he saw her differently. He saw the raw pain in her eyes. He heard the truth in her quiet voice. He realized this was not a drunken woman, but a woman of great and desperate faith. A wave of shame and then compassion washed over him. He had been sharp and unkind, but now he knew he had to bless her. He was God's representative, and he saw that God was already at work in this woman's life. He cleared his throat and spoke again, but this time his voice was gentle. "Go in peace," he said, "and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him." In the midst of that desperate, silent prayer, before Eli had even spoken to her, Hannah had made a promise. It was, a huge, costly promise, a vow made between her and God alone. As she pleaded for a son, she told God what she would do if he answered her. This wasn't a bargain, trying to trick God into giving her what she wanted. It was an act of, complete surrender. It was her way of saying, "God, I want a child so much, but I want your will even more. This child will not be mine. He will be yours." She whispered the vow in her heart. "O Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life." This was an incredible promise. She was offering to give back the very thing she wanted more than anything in the world. She wasn't just asking for a baby to cuddle and to raise. She was asking for a son that she could dedicate completely to God's service, from the moment he was weaned. This meant he would live in the temple at Shiloh. He would serve under Eli the priest. He would not be raised in her home in Ramathaim. She would only see him once a year when they came for the festival. He would belong to God in a special way, set apart for a holy purpose. This vow showed the depth of Hannah's faith. She understood that children are not possessions to be owned, but gifts from God to be treasured, and, if he asks, to be given back to him. Her desire was not selfish, it was rooted in a deep love for God. And so, when Eli gave her his blessing, it fell upon a heart that had already given everything away. His words, "May the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him," were not just empty wishes. They were a confirmation of what was already happening in the spiritual world. Hannah's faith and her incredible vow had moved the heart of God. She left the temple a different woman. Her face was no longer sad. She went back to her family, and she ate. Something inside her had shifted. She had left her burden with God, and she trusted him with the rest. Just as Eli had said, God remembered Hannah. In the quiet of her home, far from the temple in Shiloh, a miracle began. God, who had closed her womb, now opened it. The emptiness she had felt for so many years began to be filled. Hannah became pregnant. The taunts of Peninnah faded into the background, silenced by the quiet joy that was growing inside of Hannah. Every day was a new wonder. She could feel life stirring within her, a secret promise between her and God. Her heart, once so heavy with sorrow, was now light with thankfulness and praise. Elkanah looked at his wife and saw a new light in her eyes. The deep sadness that had clouded her face was gone, replaced by a serene and joyful glow. Their home, which had once been a place of tension and tears, was now filled with a new and gentle hope. The Bible tells us that in the course of time, Hannah gave birth to a son. She held him in her arms, the very child she had wept and prayed for. The empty space was filled, the ache was gone. She looked at his tiny fingers and his perfect little face, and her heart overflowed with love. She named him Samuel. The name itself was a prayer and a testimony. It meant heard by God. Every time she called his name, she would remember. She would remember her tears on the temple floor. She would remember her desperate, silent prayer. She would remember God's faithfulness. His name was a constant reminder that God listens. He hears the cries of the brokenhearted. He does not forget his people. Samuel was not just her son, he was a living, breathing symbol of God's grace and power in her life. Hannah treasured every moment with her little boy. She nursed him, sang to him, and watched him grow. These were precious years. She knew they were borrowed time. She had made a promise to God, and she was a woman who kept her promises. But for now, she was simply a mother delighting in her son. The laughter of a baby now filled the rooms where her sobs had once echoed. God had turned her mourning into dancing. He had taken her greatest sorrow and transformed it into her greatest joy. The prayer of a heartbroken woman had been answered. The years passed quickly, as they always do when a home is filled with the joy of a young child. Samuel grew from a baby into a little boy, strong and healthy. The time came when he was weaned, no longer needing his mother's milk. For Hannah, this was a moment of both joy and sadness. It was the moment she had been waiting for. It was time to fulfill the vow she had made to God in the temple so long ago. She had not forgotten her promise. Her love for God was even greater than her love for the son he had given her. So Hannah prepared for the journey back to Shiloh. This time, she was not going with a heavy heart and tear-filled eyes. She was going with a heart full of gratitude, leading her little boy by the hand. Elkanah went with her, his heart full of awe at his wife's incredible faith. They brought with them a generous offering to give to the Lord, a 3-year-old bull, flour, and wine. They were not just dropping Samuel off, they were presenting him to God in a formal act of worship and dedication. This was a celebration of God's goodness. They arrived at the house of the Lord in Shiloh and went to find Eli. The old priest was still there. He may not have remembered the specific woman from that night years ago among all the faces he saw. Hannah walked up to him with little Samuel standing beside her. "Pardon me, my lord," she said, her voice steady and clear. "As surely as you live, I am the woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord." The memory must have come flooding back to Eli, the swaying woman he had mistaken for a drunk. "I prayed for this child," Hannah continued, placing a loving hand on Samuel's small head, "and the Lord has granted me what I asked of him." She looked from the priest to her son, her eyes shining with love and holy purpose. "So now I give him to the Lord. For his whole life he will be given over to the Lord." And right there, in front of the priest, she presented her greatest treasure back to God. She was not abandoning her son, she was entrusting him into the hands of his heavenly Father for a purpose greater than she could imagine. At that moment, with her son dedicated to God and her promise fulfilled, a song of pure joy burst from Hannah's heart. It was not a song of sadness or loss, but a song of victory. It was a song for everyone who has ever felt small, forgotten, or weak. "My heart rejoices in the Lord," she sang. "In the Lord my horn is lifted high." A horn was a symbol of strength. Hannah was saying that God was her strength. She, who had felt so weak and powerless, was now strong because of what God had done for her. Her song was like a sunrise, chasing away the darkness. It was a powerful poem of praise that celebrated God's amazing upside-down kingdom. She sang about how God changes everything. "The bows of the warriors are broken," she sang, "but those who stumbled are armed with strength. Those who were full hire themselves out for food, but those who were hungry hunger no more." She had been hungry for a child, and God had filled her. Peninnah, who had been so full of pride, was now silenced. God lifts up the humble and brings down the proud. This song wasn't just about her, it was about God's character. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. She sang of how God raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with princes. This was her story. She had been in the dust, crushed by her grief, and God had lifted her up and honored her. Her personal story of answered prayer had given her a glimpse into the very heart of God and His plan for the world. Her song, recorded forever in the Bible, became a prophecy. It looked forward to a time when God would send another king, a Messiah, who would save His people. Mary, the mother of Jesus, would sing a song much like Hannah's hundreds of years later when God gave her a special son. Hannah's song shows how her humble faith gave her a deep understanding of God's ways. She saw that with God, the impossible becomes possible. The sad stories get happy endings, and the world is turned right side up. Her joy was not just in having a son, but in knowing the God who had given him. And so, little Samuel stayed in Shiloh. He lived in the temple and served the Lord under the watchful eye of Eli the priest. The Bible tells us he wore a small linen ephod, a special garment like the priests wore. He was just a boy, but he was already beginning his life's work. He would help with small tasks around the house of God, lighting the lamps, opening the doors in the morning. He was growing up in the very presence of the Lord. He was God's boy, living in God's house. It was a unique and special childhood, set apart for a divine purpose. Every year, his mother, Hannah, would come to see him. She would never arrive empty-handed. Each year, she would sew a new little robe for him, a bit bigger than the one from the year before. It was a mother's love, stitched into every fiber of the cloth. It was her way of caring for him, even from a distance. And every time she came, Eli would bless her and Elkanah, praying that God would give them more children to take the place of the one they had so faithfully dedicated to him. And God did. He blessed Hannah with 3 more sons and 2 daughters. Her heart and her home were now full. Samuel grew, and the Bible says he continued to grow in stature and in favor with the Lord and with people. While Eli's own sons were wicked and corrupt, this little boy, given to God by a faithful mother, was pure and obedient. He was a light shining in a dark time for Israel. The word of the Lord was rare in those days, but God was preparing to speak again. He was preparing a prophet, a leader, a judge who would guide his people back to him. And it was all starting with this little boy sleeping near the Ark of the Covenant. The story of Samuel is the story of a God who hears. It began with the desperate, tearful prayer of a woman who felt forgotten, and it became a legacy of faith that changed a nation. Hannah simply trusted God with her deepest hurt, and God turned her sorrow into a song and her emptiness into a future for his people. It reminds us that no prayer is too small, no person is too insignificant, and no situation is too hopeless for God. Samuel's story began with a prayer and became a legacy. What miracle can your faith begin today?